It's Friday, October 13th. Let's talk PlayStation. So there are a few news stories that I'd like to discuss with you that happened this past week, and we'll get into our first one right away, which is a very interesting news story. I always like hearing about these things, because some people seem to overlook this or forget this, or may not even realize it. But anyway, so this past week, Hajime Tabata, who is the director of Final Fantasy 15 most recently, was talking to Eurogamer, and he said a few interesting things. One thing being that their next major project, so you would assume the chronological released next Final Fantasy. He said that they're actually targeting the next generation of platforms. So PlayStation 5, the next generation Xbox, whatever Microsoft decides to call the next generation Xbox. And that's basically what they're targeting. Now, he was quick to say a few things, one thing being he doesn't know at all a possible release date for the next generation of consoles, nothing about a PS5 or next Xbox release date. He was also quick to mention that the next project isn't in pre-production or anything like that. So the next Final Fantasy is not being worked on at all. Just some very, very early pre-production stuff. And he kind of detailed that by saying the basic groundwork has already been laid out because of Final Fantasy 15. And we all know that Final Fantasy 15 had a very long, arduous development cycle of it originally being Final Fantasy Versus 13 and then being renamed to Final Fantasy 15. But even before the rename, it was a long hiatus of the developer not saying anything and just Square Enix continuously telling the press that the game is still being worked on. You will see more of it soon. And we all know that the game had a very drastic change over that course of time, right? And it took a lot of money. But it actually ended up doing pretty well. But point being, when you spend that much time on a game, specifically on this generation of consoles, and you have all that groundwork laid out, and what we're talking about is the assets in the game, the resources, the engine, all these things that they spent all this time making, especially given how PS4 and X1 are so easy to develop on, and especially given the fact that we have a situation now where we can do mid-cycle consoles, PS4 Pro, Xbox One X, and these can easily scale. Because that architecture is so easy, the groundwork that is laid out currently is going to be very easy and very applicable to the next generation of consoles. And this is something developers preach quite often, and this is the whole point of what Sony and Microsoft were doing with the PS4 and Xbox One, with their architectures and making them more like PC, is that it's very easy to get something up and running, and it's drastically more simple and drastically more efficient to develop on these machines than it was, say, in previous console generations, where typically it was completely new, very customized architecture that developers had to learn and figure out over years and over time and optimize it to make their games look even better throughout that life cycle. It's just not like that anymore. So it's interesting to see that, though, because obviously Final Fantasy games do take quite a long time to develop, but the fact that they're targeting the next generation means, well, one thing, it's very likely at some point, and this is what I was getting into in the beginning of this topic. The interesting point that people seem to forget or may overlook is that what this tells me is that in some way, shape, or form, Sony and Microsoft are finally possibly approaching developers in a very discreet manner about their next full leap of hardware. That's what people don't seem to realize. After not even a year of shipping a brand new console, so think of any console throughout, all of video games, whether it was the PlayStation 1 or the GameCube, the Wii, it only takes a year, maybe a little bit longer than that, for the console manufacturer to actually start R&Ding the next generation of hardware. They think about these things very early. We are quite a few years into PS4 and Xbox One. And yes, we do have mid-cycle consoles now. Yes, Sony's working on PlayStation VR, and they've got all this stuff going on. I guarantee you they've been thinking about PlayStation 5 and have been working on a PlayStation 5 probably 2 years ago, and same with Microsoft. The only difference this time around is that they had a mid-game in plan with those mid-cycle consoles, which is something entirely new for this generation. But I can guarantee you that they're working on those, and maybe this might tell us that Sony and Microsoft are talking to publishers and talking to developers and indirectly asking them what they'd like to see in the next hardware, because this is something Sony does. We actually know this is something every manufacturer does. They don't outright say it sometimes because they want to hide the fact that they are working on the next actual PlayStation or the next Xbox, the next Nintendo hardware, but developers have to get an inside scoop at some point, and that was, if you remember in particular with the PlayStation 4, Sony was very vocal with developers and very talkative with them to figure out how they wanted the PlayStation. Like, they asked developers first, what would you want our next machine to be like, and that shaped what the PS4 is currently today. That will probably happen again with the next Xbox and the next PlayStation, and like I said, we are 4 years into these machines, so I guarantee you in some way, shape, or form, Sony and Microsoft have approached people to get their input on how the next machines are going to look like. Now, for our next 3 news stories, it's actually a lot of things Microsoft is saying, but it's in regards to Sony, and of course it goes into that conversation about video games as a whole. But anyway, this actually segues nicely into it too, because we were just talking about this. Anyway, Microsoft's Albert Penello was speaking to MCV, discussing how the Xbox One X is not a reactionary thing to PlayStation 4 Pro, which maybe some people are seeing it that way, but I'm surprised that most people don't see it that way. Most people seem to understand that this is actually something Sony and Microsoft both came to the conclusion themselves, working separately. It still kind of blows my mind if somebody thinks that Microsoft or Sony make multi-million-dollar decisions within that quick of a time frame to be reactionary to the other company. Of course, they do something based on what the other one's doing, but you can't just completely release a brand new console just a year later that quickly. They were both thinking of these things far earlier. Anyway, Albert Penello had this interesting quote I'd like to share with you all. He said, "I give them a lot of credit for what they did there, but for me, the most interesting observation is that we both arrived at a similar idea, even if the execution is slightly different. This business tends to diverge and converge in interesting ways, and obviously we don't know what they're doing. We don't have an insight into what their plans are, so when they announced the Pro, I was surprised as anybody else was. They had a different idea in mind for what they wanted to build, so in retrospect, it may seem like we were reacting to what they were doing, but people in the business know that this has been in the works for years, and we have to lock the specs in years in advance." So Albert basically saying what I'm telling you, like, these things are done in advance. And we even, I don't know, like months ago or something, at some point I mentioned this as a talking point about the mid-cycle consoles. But that was the thing. I called it too quite a long time ago, but it is still fascinating that both these companies had the same idea moving forward with how consoles should change, because this seemed like the generation for them to change. And it's not even a drastic manner. It's still something very comfortable for most consumers, even though it was off-putting in the beginning, where a lot of people were getting mad at Sony for the PS4 Pro and all that nonsense. But I think people are over that hump now, and they see what the machines are. They're just lower volume, more premium machines of the same system that you don't necessarily have to buy, and this is just something both Microsoft and Sony felt consoles needed to turn into, which I still think is quite a good move, and it works out for most people that are into video games. You don't have to buy a Pro or an Xbox One X, but now you have the confidence of knowing that when you buy a game today, it's probably going to play on the next 3-4 generations of Sony and Microsoft's hardware. Moving on to our next news story, and I'll make this one quick because this is like literally the same damn news story every single time this comes up, but it is a new update nonetheless. Xbox head Phil Spencer was talking at the Brazil Game Show this past week with GameSpot, gave us an update on cross-network play, and so it's the same thing. He said him and Sony are still talking constantly about this, trying to make things work, giving the basic PR statement about, we got Minecraft, blah, blah, this and that. Nintendo's been very supportive, this, that, and the other, and he basically said Sony is still a no-go. What he actually, I guess the one new thing about it is that he is almost submitting or admitting to the fact that he says, the discussions with Sony may never lead to anything, which I don't know about you, but that to me says that Sony is still very firm on their answer, which is like, no, we're not going to be doing anything like this. We still don't hear updates from Sony. And the funny thing too is that if you go and read the articles, Phil actually said that he sees it from their point of view more or less. So there's really not much more we can go on there. Once again, cross-network play. Nothing really happening. Moving on to our last news story. This is still Phil talking at the Brazil Game Show with GameSpot, and this one I find rather funny. There's a lot of interpretations, I guess, that some people are taking this, but anyway, Phil once again reiterated how he doesn't like timed exclusivity or paying to keep content away from other platforms, and he actually is now admitting the irony of saying that because of the fact of Xbox's history and its current motivations of what they're doing with a great game like Cuphead or PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. You know, we're looking at those things even currently because people look at the Call of Duty thing and they go, oh, well, that wasn't when Phil was around. Because if you do remember, maybe, 2 or 3 months ago or something, he made the same comments. We did a LTPS about it, where he said, yeah, he doesn't like, paying for content to stay away from another platform. He openly said that. Now, a few months later, he's saying it again, but he's acknowledging that that's pretty ironic because they currently are doing that today, and they've still even done that while he was around. So I guess it's all about interpretation. How do you want to take this? Some people are looking at this and saying, Phil, yeah, obviously it's fucking ironic because you clearly have some motivation or some choices in these matters. And then some people are looking at this and going, yeah, well, he's got to do it. It's Xbox. He's got to. You know what I mean? What I think Phil's trying to drive at is that it's like a necessary evil almost. Like he's kind of. Then that's at least what I like about Phil is that he's very personable, but you can tell he's being genuine. And what I mean by that is he's trying to be a professional, but at the same time he's being personal about it. Like how you go on like a Twitter. Somebody's Twitter page, and they always put in their bio, opinions here are not representative of my company. It's almost like Phil's kind of doing that, where as the head of Xbox, he doesn't, he has to do those things to keep his platform going and to promote Xbox and make it a great platform and get consumers to buy that platform. But at the same time, in his own personal opinion, he isn't particularly fond of that. Now, yeah, I get it, it's still ironic. The damn thing is, though, at the very least, you can look at how drastically different Xbox is as a platform when Phil did take the helm. Because let's face it, when Don Mattrick was still around, going into the end of the Xbox 360's life cycle, they were making a lot of very poor decisions with that platform and going into the initial Xbox One launch. We all know how much of a disaster that was, and even when the platform launched. Still had a lot of the same trials and tribulations that the platform had, which is that it was $500. You were forced to buy the Kinect sensor, which people didn't want. Xbox Live still had that paywall. There was still a lot of shitty things going on, and Phil did pretty much run away with all those things. He picked up the brand and really ran away with it and did a lot of very pro-consumer things with it. So at the very least, I don't know, I guess you can look at it from that perspective. I will always say, hate it as much as you want, timed exclusivity, all that nonsense. I agree with everybody. It's shitty tactics. It's annoying. It's particularly bothersome when you primarily play on a one platform and you just want to play the other game without having to shell out their $300, $400 some odd dollars. But it is a necessary evil. Because it promotes very healthy competition. And if there was only one platform out there, they can get away with anything. Having Microsoft do these things, even having Sony at times do these things, which I'm not forgiving Sony at all whatsoever. Sony does these things a lot. And in fact, for the PlayStation 4 generation, they've actually done it pretty frequently with a number of examples, a number of games. It just, it happens. It's part of it, and that's what keeps these two kind of, fighting at each other's throats. I'll still also stay firm on the fact that I don't think Microsoft's super concerned with what Sony's doing, because they know their platform isn't doing nearly as well, and they're focusing more on that unification of Windows and Xbox. But to me, I think that's what Phil's driving at. He doesn't like it, but yeah, we're gonna do it, and we have done it, and it's likely to continue. At the very least, I like Phil for that much. I still think he's one of the more personable people in games today. Some people are really starting to not like his recent comments and things he says on Twitter and whatnot, and that's fine. You can hate the guy or dislike him for some of the ironic bullshit that he often spews out, but hey, I like it at least because he's at least showing his human side. If there's one thing that I'm sick of, and I'm sure most people are sick of, it's very PR, cover your own ass answers, and Sony still does a lot of that stuff. Anyway, those are some of the news stories I want to talk about with you guys this past week. Oh my god, so I get to talk to you again all personally. thank you so much for making that Jak and Daxter live stream as fun as it was. Obviously, a lot of you were there. If you didn't see it yet, the whole thing was actually archived, so it is up on the channel. 7+ hours, almost 8 hours it took for us to go from the beginning of the game all the way to getting a platinum trophy. And I knew it was going to take longer than it should have because my first time streaming, so I was reading a lot of the comments, and it's just easier for me to overlook things and forget where orbs are and where power cells were and all that jazz. But that was a lot of fun. So thank you all so much. I'm glad there was a good turnout and a lot of you guys genuinely enjoyed the stream. That was a lot of fun, so we should definitely do that again, for sure. Now it's just a matter of how should we do it again. Definitely not doing another 8-hour almost stream, but the one thing I was always toying around with the idea of, like, maybe we should just turn the Let's Plays into live streams, so that way, at the very least, when they go up on Monday or actually, if I did start live streaming Let's Plays, it would have to be a different day, but either way, Mondays or whatever day it would be, right? Would live stream it. We'd actually get some interaction. That'd be a lot of fun, and then it would get archived and upload it later as a regular Let's Play, just as it would normally. So we could try doing that, or we could try moving it directly to Twitch or something if a lot of people are, because I know people don't watch Let's Plays too frequently on this channel, so I know some people are just like, yeah, just stop doing it altogether or move it to somewhere else. So we can talk about that and figure out what we want to do, but if you did enjoy the streaming, please let me know. Anyway, oh no, and before I end the show, also, you may have noticed there was no knack part. That was because we did the live stream, so I figured, you know what, you got 8 hours of that, you'll get another knack part this coming Monday, so just letting you know about that. I have a few of those pre-recorded up anyway, so, which is great because it frees up my time and I get to catch up on things. Anyway, that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Rob Benecke. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you guys next Friday.